Vivian was at a point in her life where everything finally seemed to make sense. After years of focusing on her career and overcoming romantic disappointments, she had met Ronan, a charming, attentive man full of fascinating stories. From the very beginning, he showed a genuine interest in her, making her feel truly special. Their conversations were deep and filled with shared interests, and their relationship quickly blossomed naturally and intensely. That night, Ronan surprised her with an invitation to a special dinner at an elegant restaurant. He seemed more nervous than usual, but he hid it well. Vivian, on the other hand, was excited, thinking it would be just another memorable moment between them. When they arrived at the restaurant, she noticed Ronan's careful attention to detail. A reserved table in a quiet corner, beautifully adorned with candles and subtle floral arrangements. After a delicious meal, Ronan took Vivian's hand and looked directly into her eyes. His voice was steady but filled with emotion as he began speaking about how she had transformed his life. He described how she was unlike anyone he had ever met, how her kindness, intelligence, and courage inspired him every day. Then, unexpectedly, Ronan pulled a small velvet box from his pocket and knelt down. The restaurant fell silent, and Vivian was utterly speechless. He opened the box, revealing an elegant, delicate ring that seemed perfect for her. Ronan asked the question many women dream of hearing. "Vivian, you are the love of my life. Will you marry me?" Her eyes filled with tears of joy. With an emotional smile, she replied, "Yes, Ronan. Yes, I will." The restaurant erupted into applause as the two embraced. For Vivian, this seemed like the beginning of a new chapter filled with love and fulfillment. The sparkle in Ronan's eyes only reinforced her belief that he was the right man to share her future with. Little did she know that, at that moment, some pieces of the puzzle of their lives were already moving silently, ready to change everything she thought she knew about love and trust. After the proposal, Vivian was glowing with happiness. Not only did she feel she had found the perfect man, but she was eager to share her joy with her family, especially her older sister, Eloise, with whom she had always shared a close bond. Determined to introduce Ronan to everyone, Vivian organized an intimate dinner at her home, inviting Eloise and her husband, Graham, to officially meet her fiancé. On the evening of the dinner, Vivian's house was immaculate. She had carefully prepared every detail, from the menu to the decorations, wanting everything to reflect the love and joy she felt. When Eloise and Graham arrived, Vivian greeted them with a warm hug, overflowing with excitement as she announced, "I want you to meet the man of my life." Eloise smiled, surprised by her sister's enthusiasm. However, when Ronan entered the room to greet the guests, Eloise's expression changed instantly. Her eyes met Ronan's, and for a brief moment, silence filled the room. Ronan also seemed unsettled, though he tried to mask it with a polite smile. Noticing the hesitation in the air, Vivian asked lightly, "Do you two know each other?" Eloise, regaining her composure, laughed nervously and replied, "I don't think so, but you have good taste, Viv." The conversation moved on, but the tension between Eloise and Ronan was palpable. While Graham and Vivian chatted excitedly about wedding plans, Eloise barely touched her food and avoided looking at Ronan directly. He, in turn, seemed to choose his words very carefully, as if walking on a tightrope. After dinner, Eloise found a moment alone with Vivian in the kitchen. Trying to hide her nervousness, she asked, "Are you sure about him? I mean, he seems interesting." Vivian laughed, thinking her sister was just being protective, as always. "Eloise, he's wonderful. You'll see. You're going to love him as much as I do." Eloise didn't respond. As she watched Ronan from across the room, something in her expression hinted that she knew more than she was willing to share that night. After the dinner, Vivian was exhausted but happy. To her, everything had gone well, and it was only a matter of time before Eloise and Ronan developed a closer connection. However, contrary to Vivian's belief, the evening had left a deep impression on both Eloise and Ronan. On the drive home, Eloise remained silent, staring out of the car window with a thoughtful expression. Graham, noticing his wife's unusual behavior, tried to break the ice. "Are you okay? I thought you'd like Ronan. He seems like a good man." Eloise took a few seconds to respond, carefully choosing her words. "He seems like it, but there's something about him I can't quite explain. It feels like something's off." Graham, accustomed to Eloise's protective nature, didn't press further, but he knew that when his wife acted this way, There was usually something serious behind it. Meanwhile, Ronan and Vivian were sitting on the couch at her place, talking about the evening. Vivian was glowing with happiness, praising Eloise and Graham, while Ronan seemed distant, replying in monosyllables and avoiding eye contact. Sensing his detachment, Vivian asked, "Are you okay? It seems like something about the dinner bothered you." Ronan forced a smile and replied, "I'm fine, just tired. It's been a long day." Although his words were meant to reassure her, the tone of his voice suggested otherwise. Vivian decided not to push further, believing it might just be fatigue or nervousness from meeting her family. While the two prepared for bed, Eloise lay awake at home, replaying every moment of the dinner in her mind. She felt the need to confront Ronan about something, but didn't know how to do it without hurting her sister. Part of her wanted to believe she was just being paranoid, but the look Ronan had given her during dinner lingered in her mind. There was something wrong about that man, and she knew that sooner or later, she would have to uncover what it was. The night was restless for everyone. Ronan, lying next to Vivian, stared at the ceiling with a worried expression, while Eloise, in her own bed, felt her heart weighed down by doubts and suspicions. In the midst of it all, Vivian slept peacefully, unaware of the emotional storm already brewing around her. The morning after the dinner, Eloise woke up with a sense of unease she couldn't shake. As she prepared breakfast, she pondered how to approach the subject with Vivian without shattering the happiness her sister seemed to radiate. Graham, always observant, noticed Eloise's somber mood and commented, "You've been so quiet since last night. Are you going to tell me what's going on?" Eloise hesitated for a moment before replying, "Graham, I think I know Ronan from somewhere, but I'm not sure if I should say anything to Vivian." Graham, in his calm manner, responded, "If you think it could affect your sister, you need to be honest, but think carefully before you say anything. It could change everything." With his words in mind, Eloise decided to call Vivian. She needed to address her doubts before they grew any larger. Vivian, as cheerful as always, answered immediately, "Eloise, what a surprise. How are you?" Eloise tried to stay composed, but her voice betrayed a hint of anxiety. "Viv, do you have a minute? We need to talk about Ronan." Vivian, not picking up on her sister's serious tone, replied enthusiastically, "Of course. Want me to come over?" "No, I'd prefer if we talked here at my place. It's more private." Vivian was intrigued but agreed. Shortly after, she arrived at Eloise's house, curious about what her sister wanted to discuss. As soon as she walked in, Eloise greeted her with a tight hug, clearly struggling to find the right words. Sitting in the living room, Eloise finally began. "Vivian, I need to be honest with you. I don't know how to say this, but I think I've met Ronan before you did." Vivian looked visibly surprised but not alarmed. "What do you mean? Where did you meet him?" Eloise took a deep breath before continuing. "It was a few years ago, before I met Graham. I had a brief involvement with him. It was nothing serious, it didn't last long, but I never imagined he'd show up again, let alone as your fiancé." Vivian sat in silence, processing her sister's words. Her expression shifted from surprise to confusion. She tried to smile, but her discomfort was evident. "That was so long ago, wasn't it? I don't think it matters now, Eloise." Eloise tried to ease the tension. "Maybe it doesn't, but I thought you should know. I just want you to be happy, Vivian, and to have all the information before you take this big step." Vivian thanked her sister for her honesty, but as she left Eloise's house, she began to feel uneasy. Although she tried to convince herself that Ronan's past shouldn't matter, Eloise's expression during their conversation left a shadow of doubt lingering in her mind. Back home, Vivian couldn't shake what Eloise had revealed. While she tried to rationalize that Ronan's past shouldn't influence their future, an uneasiness began to consume her. She needed to clarify things before these doubts turned into something bigger. Determined, she waited for Ronan to come home from work to have a serious conversation. That evening, Ronan walked in with his usual smile but immediately noticed Vivian's serious expression. Before he could ask anything, she spoke directly. "We need to talk, Ronan. Something happened, and I need you to be completely honest with me." Ronan looked visibly unsettled but tried to remain calm. "Of course, Vivian. What's going on?" Vivian took a deep breath before continuing. "Eloise told me that you two knew each other before we met, that you had a relationship in the past. Ronan's face turned pale for a moment, and he hesitated before responding. Yes, it's true. It was a long time ago, and I didn't think it was important to bring it up. I never imagined she was your sister. Vivian was surprised by Ronan's initial honesty, but didn't feel completely reassured. Why didn't you mention this? It's something I should have known, Ronan. We're about to get married, and I feel like you hid this from me on purpose. Ronan sighed, running a hand through his hair. I was afraid of how you'd react, Viv. It was insignificant, something left in the past. I didn't want it to interfere with what we have now. Vivian looked into his eyes, trying to discern whether his words were genuine. While she wanted to believe him, something about Ronan's demeanor felt too defensive, as if he wasn't telling the whole truth. She then asked firmly, Is there anything else you haven't told me? Ronan shook his head but avoided eye contact for a moment before replying. No. Vivian. I swear there's nothing else. Vivian nodded, but part of her remained suspicious. She decided not to press further that night, but knew she would need more time to process everything. As Ronan tried to change the subject and act as though nothing had happened, Vivian felt that this secret might just be the beginning of something much larger. That night, as Ronan slept, Vivian stayed awake, replaying every word and every expression he had shown. For the first time, she began to wonder if she truly knew the man she had decided to marry. In the days following her conversation with Ronan, Vivian couldn't shake the doubts lingering in her mind. Despite his reassuring words, something about his demeanor still bothered her. She tried to focus on the wedding preparations, but thoughts about Ronan's past and Eloise's worried expression during their conversation wouldn't leave her alone. Meanwhile, Eloise couldn't ignore her own feelings. She decided to share her concerns with Graham, who listened carefully. Graham, I think there's something off about Ronan. It's not just what I know about him, but how he acted at the dinner. He seemed too nervous, like he was hiding something. Graham, always thoughtful, suggested, maybe you should dig a little deeper before jumping to conclusions. If it's serious, your sister needs to know, but you also need to be sure before causing a problem. Eloise agreed and began discreetly gathering information. She reached out to a longtime friend, Martha, who worked in the city where she had met Ronan years earlier. Martha was known for her impeccable memory and for knowing about many people's lives in that area. Eloise asked for her help in finding out more about Ronan's past. Meanwhile, Vivian decided to confront her doubts in another way. During a casual conversation with Ronan, she asked more about his time living in the same city as Eloise. She tried to approach the topic lightly but noticed that he became evasive, quickly changing the subject or giving short answers. Every attempt to clarify Ronan's past only seemed to deepen her unease. The situation became even more tense when Graham told Vivian about Eloise's investigation. Although she felt uncomfortable with the idea of her sister looking into Ronan's life, she realized it might be necessary. There were questions Ronan simply wouldn't answer, and it was beginning to affect her trust in him. One evening, while Ronan was out, Vivian casually searched through some drawers for an important document related to the wedding preparations. During her search, she found an envelope containing photographs and old letters, some of them from women she didn't recognize. While most of the letters were friendly, one had a more personal and passionate tone, signed by a woman named Clara. Vivian felt a chill run through her. Was this yet another part of Ronan's past he hadn't mentioned? Or was it something still ongoing? She knew she needed answers, and fast. Vivian was more unsettled than ever after finding the envelope with letters and photographs. While the words in the letters weren't incriminating, the passionate tone in one signed by Clara raised even more doubts about who Ronan truly was. Determined to get answers, she decided to confront him carefully to avoid escalating tensions. That evening, while Ronan was making dinner, Vivian casually brought up the topic. Ronan, while I was looking for some papers in the office, I found an envelope with some old letters and photos. One of them was signed by a woman named Clara. Who is she? Ronan paused for a moment but quickly responded with a casual tone. Oh, Clara. She was someone I knew a long time ago, before I met you. She was just a close friend, but we lost touch. Why do you ask? Although Ronan's response seemed plausible, Vivian noticed that he avoided eye contact while speaking, something he'd never done before. Feeling he wasn't being entirely truthful, she decided not to press further at that moment, but something inside her told her Clara was more than just a friend from the past. Meanwhile, Eloise received a call from her friend Martha. Martha had uncovered some information about Ronan that made the situation even more complicated. She revealed that he had been married before, but the marriage ended abruptly amidst rumors of infidelity and financial disputes. The name Clara also appeared in some of the stories as someone closely tied to him during that time. Eloise knew she had to share this information with Vivian, but feared it might ruin their relationship. However, sensing the urgency of the situation, she called her sister the next morning. "Vivian, can we meet today? I need to talk to you about something important." Vivian, still shaken by her recent discoveries, agreed. During their meeting, Eloise revealed everything Martha had found. Vivian's expression shifted from surprise to disbelief as she listened to every detail. She tried to convince herself there was an explanation for everything, but her trust in Ronan was quickly eroding. Returning home, Vivian confronted Ronan again, this time armed with the information Eloise had provided. Ronan, caught off guard, initially tried to deny it, but realizing he couldn't avoid the truth, admitted that he had been married before and that Clara had been an important figure in his life. However, he swore it was all in the past and had no relevance to their relationship. Vivian felt betrayed, not just by the secret but by his lack of transparency. She began to question whether she truly knew the man she had decided to spend her life with. The silence between them that night was deafening, and Vivian knew the full truth was still far from being uncovered. In the days following her confrontation with Ronan, Vivian found herself overwhelmed by a whirlwind of emotions. Her trust in him was increasingly fragile, and the discovery that Clara had been an important figure in his life left her questioning what else might be hidden. Determined to get answers, Vivian decided to investigate on her own. She began by revisiting the envelope she had found. In one of the photographs, Vivian noticed something she had previously overlooked. Ronan and Clara were embracing in front of a house she didn't recognize, and in the background, there was a small sign with the name of a nearby town. Using this clue, Vivian decided to take a day off to travel to the location. Upon arriving in the town, Vivian felt nervous but focused. She started discreetly asking in cafes and small shops about the names Ronan or Clara. After several unsuccessful attempts, an attendant at an antique store mentioned having heard about Clara. Clara? She used to live here years ago. She was quite a charming woman, but her story with Ronan didn't end well. Vivian feigned casual interest and asked for more details. They seemed like the perfect couple at first, but then things fell apart. People say she wanted to leave him, but he wouldn't accept it. There was a lot of drama before she finally left. "I haven't seen her since." Those words echoed in Vivian's mind. Clara wanted to leave, but Ronan wouldn't accept it. Why had he never mentioned any of this? What else was he hiding? When she returned home that evening, Vivian found Ronan waiting for her with a smile, trying to act as if everything was normal. But Vivian could no longer contain her suspicions. She took out the photograph and looked at him seriously. "Ronan, I went to the town where this photo was taken. I spoke to some people who remember you and Clara. Why didn't you ever tell me what happened between the two of you?" Ronan seemed startled and, for a moment, was speechless. Then, with a weary expression, he began to speak. "Vivian, I love you. Everything that happened before you. It's complicated. Clara and I had an intense relationship, but she left me, and it was the worst time of my life. I kept it hidden because I didn't want it to interfere with what we have now." Vivian, with tears welling up in her eyes, responded, "You kept me in the dark, Ronan. If you had been honest from the start, maybe I could have understood, but now I don't know if I can trust you. It feels like every secret I uncover just leads to more lies." Ronan tried to approach her, but Vivian took a step back. For the first time, she felt that the man she had committed to might not be who she thought he was. The sense of betrayal grew, and Vivian knew she needed to decide whether to keep digging for the truth or end this story before she got hurt even more. Vivian spent the following days avoiding Ronan while struggling to organize her thoughts. She needed to decide how to deal with the growing sense of betrayal and mistrust that consumed her. Eloise, noticing her sister's anguish, urged her to distance herself from Ronan for a while, but Vivian knew she didn't have all the answers yet. One afternoon, while going through more papers in the office, Vivian found a phone number scribbled on the edge of an old notebook. The name, Clara, was written beside it. Feeling a mix of nervousness and determination, Vivian picked up the phone and dialed. After a few rings, a female voice answered. "Hello." Vivian took a deep breath before replying. "Clara? My name is Vivian. I'm Ronan's fiancé. I need to speak with you." There was a long, tense pause before Clara responded. "Ronan's engaged? That's Unexpected. What do you want to know? Vivian didn't hesitate. Everything. I need to know who he really is and what happened between you two. Initially reluctant, Clara agreed to meet Vivian. The next day, they met at a discreet cafe in the neighboring town. Clara was an elegant and confident woman, but her eyes revealed a mix of curiosity and caution. During their conversation, Clara shared details Vivian could never have imagined. She recounted how her relationship with Ronan started passionately but quickly became complicated. Clara mentioned that he had possessive tendencies and that when she decided to break up, he refused to accept it. She had to cut all ties to move on, and even then, Ronan tried to reconnect for months. Vivian listened to every word with a lump in her throat. Clara emphasized that, despite everything, Ronan was never violent, but his inability to handle rejection had frightened her. "If he's changed, I'm happy for you," Clara said, "but you should know he has difficulty letting go of the past." When she returned home, Vivian found Ronan waiting for her again. This time, he seemed suspicious, as if he already knew something had changed. "You went to talk to someone, didn't you?" Ronan asked, his voice firm. Emotionally drained, Vivian answered honestly. "Yes, Ronan. I spoke to Clara. And now I want you to be completely honest with me. Why didn't you ever tell me what really happened?" Ronan remained silent for a moment before replying in a defeated voice. "Because I didn't want to lose you, Vivian. Clara was a part of my past that I wanted to forget. I didn't know how you'd react if you found out the truth." Vivian looked at him, trying to find a spark of sincerity. Despite his words, she couldn't ignore the weight of the revelations. The doubt lingered, and Vivian knew the next step could change everything. After Clara's revelation and the confrontation with Ronan, Vivian felt she was at a breaking point. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to come together, but the picture that emerged was nothing like what she had expected. She needed time to reflect, away from Ronan and outside influences. With that, she decided to spend a few days at Eloise's house, seeking support and clarity. Eloise, concerned for her sister, did everything she could to make Vivian feel comfortable. During long conversations on the porch, Vivian poured out her fears and doubts. "Eloise, I still love him, but I don't know if I can trust him after all this. What if there are more secrets? How will I know if I'm making the right decision?" Eloise, always straightforward, responded, "You need to think about what's best for you, Vivian. Loving someone doesn't mean accepting everything without question. Trust is the foundation of any relationship, and without it, nothing stands." As she reflected on her sister's words, Vivian began revisiting the most recent moments of her relationship with Ronan. Despite all the charm and love he showed, there was always something that seemed hidden, like a shadow hanging over them. The constant doubt was consuming Vivian, and she knew she had to act before it destroyed her emotionally. On the third day at Eloise's house, Vivian received a message from Ronan. He was asking to meet, saying he needed to explain everything once and for all. Hesitant but feeling she needed definitive answers, she agreed to meet him at a public cafe. At the meeting, Ronan was visibly shaken. He began by admitting he had made mistakes and that hiding his past was his greatest failure. "I did it because I was scared, Vivian. I finally found someone I truly love, and I didn't want you to judge me for what happened before. I thought that if you knew, you'd leave me." Vivian listened carefully, but her expression remained serious. "Ronan, it's not just about what happened before. If you had told me from the start, maybe I could have understood. The problem is that you let me discover everything on my own, and that made me feel like you didn't trust me." Ronan held Vivian's hands, his eyes pleading. "I want to fix this. I want you to see that I'm the man who can make you happy. Please give me a chance." Vivian took a deep breath. She knew she loved him, but she also knew that trust wasn't something that could easily be rebuilt. Deciding then and there seemed impossible. With a trembling voice, she replied, "I need more time, Ronan. This is too much to decide right now. I need to think about what's best for me." As she left the cafe, Vivian felt a massive weight on her shoulders. She knew that whatever decision she made would be a turning point in her life. Days after her meeting with Ronan, Vivian still felt lost. His plea for another chance echoed in her mind, but the doubts remained. Then, unexpectedly, Clara reached out again. She said there was something more important to share, something that could completely change Vivian's view of Ronan. They met in a quiet park. Clara seemed more serious this time, as if she were carrying a weight she had been holding onto for a long time. After a few moments of silence, she began. "Vivian, I thought long and hard before reaching out to you again. But there's something you need to know about Ronan, something I didn't mention during our last conversation." Vivian felt a chill run down her spine but remained composed. "What is it, Clara? Please tell me." Clara took a deep breath before continuing. "When I ended things with Ronan, it wasn't just because he was possessive. There was infidelity. I found out he was involved with someone else while we were still together. That's what made me cut all ties with him. I didn't want to tell you before because I thought maybe he had changed, but I needed to be honest." Vivian was in shock. The idea that Ronan could have deceived Clara so deeply shook her even more. She tried to process the information, but it felt like an avalanche of emotions. At the same time, Vivian began connecting the dots with her own experiences. The secrets, the half-truths, his hesitation to share his past. Clara continued, "I'm not telling you this to hurt you, but so you can see what he might still be hiding. He can be charming, but he needs to be honest for any relationship to work." Vivian thanked Clara but was devastated. When she returned home, she found Ronan waiting for her again, holding flowers, trying to show he was willing to regain her trust. But this time, Vivian couldn't hide her pain. "Ronan, you told me you wanted to be honest with me, but there's still something you're not telling me, isn't there?" she asked, looking at him directly. Ronan tried to respond, but the words got caught in his throat. Vivian saw the internal conflict in him, but she wasn't willing to keep living in the shadow of secrets. "If you truly love me, Ronan, you need to tell me everything. Otherwise, this ends here." Ronan took a deep breath, his eyes filled with guilt but also determination. He knew that at this moment, there was no more room for lies. Vivian sat in the living room, watching Ronan as he struggled to find the right words. The silence between them was deafening, and the weight of the revelations seemed to fill the air. Finally, with a heavy sigh, Ronan began to speak. "You're right, Vivian. I hid things from you, not because I wanted to deceive you, but because I was afraid. Afraid that you wouldn't forgive me, afraid of losing the one good thing I've built in my life. You." Ronan confessed that his past with Clara wasn't just a failed relationship, but that he had betrayed her trust, just as Clara had described. He admitted that after Clara, he promised himself he would change, but he never had the courage to face what he had done. He had spent years trying to forget, but when he met Vivian, he felt he could start fresh. "I love you, Vivian. You're everything I've ever wanted, and that's why I was so afraid to tell you the truth. But I know I've made mistakes. I know my hesitation has only made things worse." Vivian listened to every word, her heart heavy. She knew Ronan was being sincere in that moment, but she also knew that trust, once broken, was difficult to rebuild. He was willing to change, but would that be enough to heal the wounds caused by his lies? After a long silence, Vivian finally replied, "Ronan, I love you, but love isn't enough without trust. I need time to think, to figure out if I can overcome all of this. And you need time to face your past, to become the person you want to be. Not for me, but for yourself." Vivian's words were firm yet kind. Ronan, with tears in his eyes, nodded, knowing he couldn't force anything in that moment. In the days that followed, Vivian made the difficult decision to end the engagement. She needed to prioritize her own peace and rebuild her confidence before committing again. Despite the pain, she felt a sense of relief, as though she was finally freeing herself from the weight of uncertainty. Ronan, in turn, decided to seek help to deal with his past and become the person he always wanted to be. He left a message for Vivian months later, thanking her for being the reason behind his personal growth and promising never to forget the impact she had on his life. Now focused on herself, Vivian felt that, for the first time in a long while, she was in control of her own happiness. The experience had taught her that true love begins with honesty and self-respect. And as she watched the sun set on a peaceful evening, she knew the future was full of possibilities, and she was ready for all of them. If you liked this story, subscribe to the channel and give it a like. Thank you.